Welcome to Impeachment, the End of Reconstruction, and Segregation, a study guide. Congress, still unhappy with Andrew Johnson, passed a series of laws to limit the president's power. In August of 1867, President Johnson suspended Secretary of War Edwin Stanton without first getting Senate approval. When the Senate refused to approve the suspension, Johnson removed Stanton from office, replacing him with Ulysses S. Grant, thereby violating one of the new laws Congress had passed. In response to Johnson's actions, the House of Representatives voted to impeach, or formally charge with wrongdoing, Andrew Johnson. The impeachment trial, which would be held in the Senate, began in March of 1868. After 3 months, the senators cast 2 votes. In both votes, the result was 1 vote short of the 2/3 majority needed to convict Andrew Johnson. Therefore, the Senate acquitted him, and President Johnson served out the rest of his term. In the election of 1868, the Republicans chose General Ulysses S. Grant as their presidential candidate, and the Democrats nominated Horatio Seymour. Grant had no problem winning the election and becoming our 18th president. In February 1869, Congress passed the 15th Amendment to the Constitution. This amendment prohibited or stopped the state and federal government from denying the right to vote to any male citizen because of their race, color, or previous condition of servitude, meaning slavery. The ratification of this amendment won African American men the right to legally vote. The Republicans dominated Southern politics due to the 700,000 African Americans that signed up to vote as Republicans. African Americans were important as voters and as government officials. African Americans served in state legislatures, as well as 14 African Americans in the House of Representatives and 2 in the Senate. Hiram Revels and Blanche K. Bruce were 2 of those first African American senators and representatives. Frederick Douglass was also an important leader who insisted on full equality for African Americans. Some Southern whites supported the Republicans. Former Confederates called these people scalawags, meaning worthless rascals. Northern whites who moved down to the South to take advantage of Reconstruction were called carpetbaggers because they arrived with their belongings in cheap suitcases made of carpet fabric. Many Southerners accused Reconstruction governments of corruption, dishonesty, or illegal actions. Most Southerners opposed the expansion of African American rights and made life very difficult for them. Secret societies such as the Ku Klux Klan, or KKK, used fear and violence to deny rights to African Americans. In 1870 and 1871, Congress tried to pass laws to prevent Klan violence, but the laws had limited success because most of white Southerners wouldn't speak out against these societies. Reconstruction did bring improvement to education for African Americans and for the poor whites in the South. The Reconstruction government created public school systems for both races, and within a few years about half of all children in the South were enrolled in public schools. In most Southern states, African Americans and whites attended different schools, but Louisiana, South Carolina, and Florida required that their schools be integrated, meaning both whites and African Americans attend the same school. But the laws were not being enforced. The Freedmen's Bank helped some African Americans buy land for farming. Unfortunately, the most common form of farm work for African Americans was called sharecropping. It was a system where the landowner rented a plot of land to the sharecropper or farmer with a shack, seeds, tools, maybe even a mule. The sharecropper worked the farm, and when their crops were harvested, received a portion of the crops. Sharecropping, however, turned out to be little better than slavery. Most of the sharecroppers found themselves deeply in debt to the landowners. Sometimes those debts carried on for generations, keeping the whole family tied to their land by debt. By 1870, all Southern states had rejoined the Union. Many Northerners began to lose interest in Reconstruction, believing it was time for the South to solve its own problems. The old radical leaders began to disappear, and Southern Democrats were taking back political control in the South. Reports of corruption in the federal government continued to spread throughout the nation in the early 1870s. The issue of corruption caused a group of Republicans to break away from their party and propose peaceful reconciliation or a coming together with the Southern whites. This group was known as the Liberal Republicans, as they joined another group of Republicans that had split from the party to nominate Horace Greeley to run against Ulysses S. Grant in the 1872 presidential election. During the presidential campaign, liberal Republicans called for an expanded amnesty or pardon for white Southerners. Grant won an easy victory over Greeley to serve a second term as president, and Congress passed the Amnesty Act in May of 1872. Democrats regained control of Southern state governments with the help of the violent groups such as the KKK. By the time of the congressional elections in 1874, charges of corruption and economic mismanagement had badly weakened the Republican Party. The Democrats easily gained seats in the Senate and won full control of the House of Representatives. The Republicans nominated Rutherford B. Hayes as their candidate in the 1876 presidential election, and the Democrats nominated Samuel Tilden. There was a dispute over the electoral votes, and in order to solve it, Congress created a special commission, or a group, to settle the dispute. After researching the problem, the commission gave the presidency to Rutherford B. Hayes. In March of 1877, Congress confirmed the verdict of the commission, and Rutherford B. Hayes was inaugurated as our 19th President of the United States 2 days later. In exchange for Southern support of the Commission's verdict, concessions were made to the South. The Compromise of 1877 said that more aid would be given to the South, and troops would be removed from the Southern states. In return, Southern Democrats promised to maintain African American rights. Hayes followed his inauguration by making a goodwill trip to the South. While there, he made it clear he intended to let the South handle their racial issues, and Reconstruction was now officially over. Once the Union military left the South, Southern leaders found ways to prevent African Americans from voting, despite the 15th Amendment and the Compromise of 1877. Some of the strategies used were first a poll tax, or a fee that people had to pay before voting. Most of the freedmen did not have money to pay the poll tax, so they could not vote. Another way was a literacy test, requiring voters to read or explain very difficult parts of state or federal constitutions, which most freedmen could not do. But there were also many whites that could not read, and the literacy test was also keeping them from voting. So the states passed a grandfather clause. If someone did not pass the literacy test, they could still vote if their fathers or grandfathers had voted before Reconstruction. Some states even resorted to violence to discourage African Americans from showing up to vote. The South developed a segregated or separated society by passing Jim Crow laws which required African American and whites to be separated in almost every public area. When this was challenged in court, the Supreme Court upheld the segregation laws in Plessy v. Ferguson 1896. The Supreme Court's ruling said that public facilities should be separate but equal for each race. There was continued and increasing violence, including beatings and lynchings against African Americans after Reconstruction. Many African Americans who had gained political office and power found it taken away after Reconstruction. The slaves were free but not equal because of segregation. Leaders such as W.E.B. Du Bois continued to demand full political rights for African Americans. In the end, Reconstruction was both a success and a failure. And now you know a little bit about what happened at the end of Reconstruction and after Reconstruction ended.